The saddest thing about losing everything is discovering that 37 cents can feel heavier than $1 million. The golden afternoon sun reflected across the glass towers of downtown Manhattan as Benjamin Crawford stepped out of the headquarters of Crawford Global after completing the largest acquisition of his career. At 40 years old, the white millionaire had become one of the most admired business leaders in America, a man whose decisions shaped companies, whose interviews filled financial magazines, and whose calendar left almost no room for yesterday. His assistants hurried behind him discussing investors, private flights, and an evening celebration overlooking the Hudson River, but Benjamin barely listened. Something inside him had felt strangely restless for weeks, a quiet emptiness that no business victory seemed able to silence. Instead of entering the waiting black luxury sedan, he decided to walk several blocks through the city before attending the celebration. Autumn had painted New York in warm shades of amber and crimson. Maple leaves drifted across the sidewalks while the aroma of fresh coffee and baked bread floated from neighborhood cafes. Office workers laughed outside restaurants, children held their parents' hands after school, and musicians filled the corners with gentle jazz that softened the constant rhythm of traffic. It looked like an ordinary afternoon until Benjamin reached a small neighborhood grocery store tucked between two older brick buildings. Just inside the entrance, a woman stood beside the checkout counter with two young children. She wore a simple dark blue sweater, well-kept jeans, and comfortable shoes that had clearly lasted through many seasons. Although nothing about her clothing suggested wealth, everything about the way she carried herself reflected quiet dignity. Benjamin stopped walking. His heartbeat slowed. He knew that profile before she even turned around. Maya Richardson, the woman who had once been his wife. 6 years had passed since the divorce that everyone in the business world had quietly accepted as another unavoidable casualty of ambition. He had not seen her once since the courthouse steps. Time seemed to pause as she gently emptied a handful of coins onto the checkout counter. Beside her stood a little boy and a little girl, each holding several pennies and quarters with extraordinary care. Their tiny fingers counted every coin twice before placing them into neat little stacks. The cashier waited patiently without showing the slightest impatience. The little boy looked down one final time before lifting his eyes toward Maya. His voice was soft enough that only those standing nearby could hear. "Mom, we are still 37 cents short." Maya closed her eyes for a brief moment before opening them again with a warm, reassuring smile that carried no trace of panic. She gently rested one hand on each child's shoulder. "That is all right," she whispered. "We will leave one thing behind today and come back for it another time. There is always another tomorrow." The little girl reached into the pocket of her jacket and proudly produced 2 more pennies. "I forgot these." Maya smiled and kissed the top of her daughter's curls. "Every little bit matters," she said gently. Benjamin felt the world around him disappear. The woman who had once shared dreams of building a beautiful future beside him was now teaching 2 children how to choose between groceries, because they were 37 cents short. Then the little boy looked up, and Benjamin's breath caught in his chest. The child had the same thoughtful gray-blue eyes Benjamin saw every morning in his own reflection. A second later the little girl laughed at something her brother whispered, and the unmistakable curve of her smile carried a memory Benjamin had not realized he still possessed. Standing only a few feet away, surrounded by strangers who never noticed him, the millionaire who believed he had everything suddenly found himself staring at 2 faces that made him question everything he thought he knew about the life he had left behind. Benjamin remained standing outside the grocery store long after every other customer had continued with their afternoon. The city still buzzed around him with impatient traffic, conversations, and distant sirens, yet all he could hear was the quiet voice of the little boy saying they were still 37 cents short. Maya thanked the cashier with the same gentle grace she had always carried through difficult moments. She quietly removed a carton of strawberries from the grocery bag and placed it back on the shelf before taking the children's hands. Neither child complained. The little girl simply smiled and whispered, "We can get them next time, Mom." Maya nodded warmly. "Exactly. We have everything we truly need today." Benjamin watched the 3 of them leave the store together, unable to move. 6 years earlier, Maya had walked out of the courthouse carrying only a small suitcase and the dignity that no legal document could ever take from her. The newspapers had described their divorce in predictable headlines about ambition, changing priorities, and two successful people choosing separate paths. None of those articles had known the truth. Their marriage had not ended because they stopped loving each other. It had ended because success had slowly filled every empty space where honest conversations once lived. Benjamin remembered the tiny apartment they had rented during the first years of their marriage. Maya worked long shifts as a school counselor, while he spent endless nights trying to convince investors that his ideas deserved a chance. Whenever another business proposal failed, she quietly reminded him that setbacks were only temporary. When the first profitable year finally arrived, she surprised him with a homemade dinner instead of celebrating with expensive gifts. She always believed that achievements mattered more when they were shared with the people who helped create them. As Benjamin's company expanded, everything around them changed. Private meetings replaced family dinners. International flights replaced weekend walks through Central Park. Lawyers, consultants, and board members gradually became louder voices than the woman waiting for him at home. Maya rarely complained. Instead, she patiently adjusted her schedule around his, believing the busy season would eventually pass. It never did. Small misunderstandings quietly became larger silences until neither of them knew how to begin difficult conversations anymore. Benjamin could still remember the final morning before the divorce hearing. Maya had called him twice while he prepared for an emergency board meeting in Chicago. His legal assistant answered instead, explaining that all communication should remain between attorneys until the settlement was complete. Benjamin had accepted that advice without questioning it. Looking back now, he wondered what she had wanted to tell him so desperately. His thoughts returned to the two children walking beside her. The little boy's thoughtful expression. The little girl's unmistakable smile. The timing refused to leave his mind. Their ages seemed painfully close to the years that had passed since Maya disappeared from his life. Across the street, Maya and the children stopped beside a small public park where orange leaves covered the walking paths like scattered pieces of sunlight. The twins laughed while chasing one another around a wooden bench before returning to help Maya organize the grocery bags. Benjamin instinctively followed from a respectful distance, careful not to interrupt their afternoon. Hidden beneath the branches of an old maple tree, he watched Maya kneel to straighten the little girl's scarf before brushing a strand of hair away from the boy's forehead with the same gentle tenderness she had once shown him during the hardest days of his career. Watching the quiet family from across the park, Benjamin felt an unfamiliar certainty settle inside him. Whatever truth had separated them 6 years ago had never truly disappeared. It had simply been waiting patiently for the day when 37 cents would become far more valuable than every dollar he had ever earned. Maya remained unaware that Benjamin followed at a respectful distance, as she and the twins wandered through the quiet neighborhood park. The late afternoon sun filtered through rows of maple trees, painting the winding paths with shifting patches of gold and amber. Liam and Layla laughed as they gathered colorful leaves, comparing their shapes before carefully placing the prettiest ones inside a small paper bag. Maya watched them with gentle amusement, reminding them not to run too far ahead. There was nothing extraordinary about the afternoon, yet every ordinary moment carried a quiet beauty Benjamin had not noticed in years. He stood beneath the shade of an old oak tree, watching from far enough away that he would not disturb them. The twins did not carry expensive toys or electronic devices. Instead, they found joy in the smallest discoveries. Liam proudly pointed toward a squirrel balancing on a low fence while Layla clapped softly, afraid a louder sound might frighten it away. Maya knelt beside them, smiling as she explained how every living thing deserved kindness, no matter how small. Benjamin felt an unexpected ache in his chest. Those were the same words Maya had once spoken to him when they volunteered together at an animal shelter during the earliest days of their marriage. Some memories faded with time, but others waited patiently for the right moment to return. The family soon settled onto a weathered wooden bench overlooking a small pond where ducks glided peacefully across the water. Maya opened the grocery bag and divided 2 simple sandwiches into equal portions, making certain the children each received the larger half before quietly taking the smallest piece for herself. Benjamin noticed every detail. She never hesitated. She never complained. She simply smiled as though giving away the better portion came as naturally as breathing. While they ate, Liam suddenly looked toward his mother. "Mom," he asked softly, Do you think our dad likes autumn too? Maya became still for only a heartbeat before answering with remarkable calm. I believe he probably does, she said gently. Autumn reminds people that beautiful things can change without losing their value. Layla leaned against her mother's shoulder. Will we ever meet him? Maya brushed a curl away from her daughter's forehead and looked across the shimmering pond. Life has a way of bringing people together when the time is right, she answered. Until then, we keep choosing kindness. Benjamin felt his breath catch. She had not spoken with bitterness. She had not filled their hearts with anger or disappointment. She had protected the image of a father they had never known even after all these years. A few minutes later, an elderly woman accidentally dropped her walking cane near the edge of the path. Before anyone else reacted, Liam hurried over, picked it up carefully, and returned it with both hands. Layla smiled warmly and offered the woman one of the bright maple leaves she had collected. The woman thanked them with moist eyes before continuing her slow walk through the park. Maya simply nodded with quiet pride. She did not praise them loudly because kindness was already part of who they were. Watching the scene unfold, Benjamin realized that the children carried values no amount of wealth could purchase. Their compassion, patience, and humility had all been quietly shaped by the woman he had once promised to stand beside forever. As the family stood to leave the park, Benjamin noticed the fading sunlight reflecting across the pond like scattered pieces of glass. For the first time since seeing Maya again, one thought became impossible to silence. If the timing, the children's ages, and the unmistakable resemblance were not coincidences, then somewhere inside the life he believed he had left behind waited a truth powerful enough to change everything he understood about his own future. Benjamin barely slept that night. Long after the lights of Manhattan faded into scattered reflections beyond his penthouse windows, his thoughts remained fixed on Maya, Liam, and Layla. The image of three people quietly sharing two simple sandwiches returned again and again until every business success surrounding him seemed strangely insignificant. Before sunrise, he arrived at his office earlier than anyone else. Instead of reviewing quarterly reports, he unlocked a private cabinet containing old legal files that had not been touched since the divorce. Dust rested lightly across the folders, silent reminders of a chapter he had spent years refusing to reopen. One document after another passed beneath his hands. Property agreements, financial disclosures, court filings. Everything appeared exactly as he remembered until a thin envelope slipped unnoticed from the back of one file and landed softly on his desk. Across the front in faded handwriting were four simple words. Personal. For Benjamin. His heartbeat quickened. He carefully unfolded the letter inside. It was written by Maya 6 years earlier, dated 4 days before the divorce hearing. The first sentence stole the air from his lungs. There is something too important to leave inside a courtroom. Benjamin read every line twice. Maya had asked for one final private meeting before signing the divorce papers. She never mentioned money, property, or legal matters. She simply wrote that there was news which would change both of their lives forever, and that she wanted him to hear it directly from her. The final paragraph ended with quiet hope. No matter what happens to us, I believe truth deserves one conversation. Benjamin closed his eyes. He had never received the letter. He immediately searched through the remaining documents until another note attached to the correspondence caught his attention. It had been prepared by the senior attorney handling the settlement. The recommendation stated that all direct communication between both parties should be suspended until the divorce was finalized in order to prevent unnecessary emotional complications. Benjamin leaned back slowly, overwhelmed by disbelief. Someone else had decided that conversation was inconvenient. Someone else had quietly prevented the final meeting Maya had pleaded for. His phone remained untouched as the morning passed. Meetings were canceled one after another, while memories continued returning with painful clarity. He remembered Maya calling repeatedly during those final days while he traveled between Chicago and New York. Every call had been redirected through assistants and attorneys because everyone insisted emotional distance would simplify the legal process. He had accepted their advice without asking a single question. Now every decision looked different. Shortly before noon, Benjamin contacted Margaret Ellis, the executive assistant who had worked beside him throughout those difficult years before retiring. They met inside a quiet cafe overlooking Bryant Park. After listening carefully, Margaret sighed with visible regret. "Benjamin, there is something I have wanted to tell you for years." She folded her hands gently across the table. "Maya came to your office twice asking to see you. She waited for hours both times." Benjamin stared at her in silence. Margaret lowered her eyes. The legal team instructed reception not to let her upstairs. They believed seeing each other would complicate the settlement. Benjamin felt every word settle heavily inside his chest. Maya had not walked away without trying. She had stood only a few floors below his office carrying a truth that never reached him. As he left the cafe later that afternoon, one realization became impossible to escape. If Maya's letter had promised news capable of changing both their lives forever, then somewhere between those forgotten pages and the two children playing beneath autumn trees waited the answer that had quietly followed him for 6 long years. Margaret's words echoed inside Benjamin's mind long after he left the cafe. The city continued moving around him with its usual urgency, but every passing stranger seemed to disappear beneath one overwhelming question. What had Maya been trying so desperately to tell him 6 years ago? Instead of returning to his office, he drove toward the quiet neighborhood where he had seen Maya and the twins. He parked several blocks away, determined not to intrude on their lives but unable to ignore the truth that seemed closer with every passing hour. As evening settled across the tree-lined streets, warm lights appeared inside the modest apartment building where Maya lived. Through a second-floor window, Benjamin caught gentle glimpses of an ordinary life that somehow felt more extraordinary than every luxury he had ever owned. Liam sat at a small kitchen table concentrating on his spelling homework, while Layla carefully colored autumn leaves with bright pencils that had been sharpened until they were almost too small to hold. Maya moved quietly between the stove and the table, preparing a simple dinner while stopping every few minutes to help with homework or answer another curious question. Nothing inside the apartment appeared expensive, yet everything reflected care. The curtains were neatly pressed. Children's drawings covered one wall with cheerful colors. A small vase held fresh wildflowers gathered from the neighborhood park. Every detail spoke of a home built through love instead of abundance. Benjamin remained inside his car, watching only long enough to understand something he had overlooked for years. Maya had never stopped building a beautiful life. She had simply built it without him. His phone vibrated repeatedly with messages from board members waiting for him at an important dinner celebrating the company's latest expansion into Europe. He silenced every notification without reading them. For the first time in decades, missing a business event no longer felt like failure. Missing 6 years of 2 children's lives did. The following afternoon, Benjamin quietly returned to the neighborhood park where he had first seen the family together. Maya and the twins arrived shortly after school carrying backpacks and a small picnic blanket. Liam immediately helped an elderly neighbor carry groceries across the walking path, while Layla stopped to tie the loose shoelace of a younger child who had begun crying in frustration. Neither child looked toward Maya for praise. They simply acted because kindness had become part of who they were. Maya smiled softly, offering only a quiet nod that told them they had done the right thing. Benjamin watched every moment with growing admiration. Then Liam reached into his backpack and carefully removed a folded drawing. "Mom," he said proudly, "my teacher asked us to draw our heroes today." Maya unfolded the paper. Benjamin could not see the picture clearly from where he stood, but he heard Layla giggle happily before pointing at the page. "You forgot to draw yourself too," she said. Liam smiled. "Heroes help other people first. Mom already knows that." Maya gently wrapped both children in a warm embrace, kissing each forehead before folding the drawing with obvious care. Benjamin lowered his eyes as emotion quietly settled over him. Those children had been raised with compassion, humility, and dignity despite every challenge life had placed before them. Whatever secret Maya had tried to share before the divorce, one truth had already become impossible to deny. She had never spent 6 years teaching Liam and Layla to resent the father they had never known. Instead, she had filled their hearts with the very values Benjamin himself had nearly forgotten, and that realization hurt far more deeply than any regret he had ever carried. 3 days later, Benjamin finally accepted that watching from a distance would never answer the questions that had quietly followed him since the afternoon outside the grocery store. He did not arrive carrying expensive gifts, flowers, or promises. Instead, on a cool Saturday morning, he walked to the neighborhood park wearing a simple navy sweater and dark jeans, looking less like one of the country's most successful businessmen and more like an ordinary man hoping for the chance to begin an honest conversation. Maya was helping Liam and Layla fly a brightly colored kite across the open field when she noticed him approaching. Her smile faded into thoughtful silence, but there was no anger in her eyes. She simply waited. The twins turned curiously toward the unfamiliar man they had seen from a distance several times before. Benjamin stopped several feet away, careful to respect the space Maya had built for her family. "Good morning," he said quietly. Maya nodded politely. "Good morning, Benjamin." Hearing his name surprised the children. They looked from their mother to the tall stranger with growing curiosity. Maya gently rested a hand on each child's shoulder. "Children, this is someone I knew a long time ago." Liam stepped forward first, offering a polite handshake exactly as Maya had taught him. "Nice to meet you, sir." Benjamin accepted the small hand carefully, feeling an emotion he could not fully describe. "It is very nice to meet you too." Layla smiled warmly before introducing herself with the same quiet confidence. Benjamin realized he had negotiated billion-dollar agreements with less nervousness than he felt speaking to these two children. Before anyone could continue the conversation, a soccer ball rolled across the path toward a small duck pond where several younger children chased after it. Liam immediately ran to stop the ball before it reached the water and returned it with a cheerful smile. Layla bent down to help a little girl whose shoelace had come undone. Neither child hesitated. Their first instinct was simply to help. Benjamin watched with quiet admiration. Maya noticed the expression on his face. "They believe kindness should never wait for permission," she said softly. Benjamin looked at her with genuine respect. "They learned that from you." Maya gave a small smile but gently shook her head. "They learned it by watching many good people." The breeze carried the kite higher into the bright autumn sky. Liam looked toward Benjamin with hopeful eyes. "Would you like to help us keep it flying?" The invitation caught Benjamin completely by surprise. He glanced toward Maya, silently asking whether she was comfortable with the idea. She studied him for a long moment before giving a slight nod. Benjamin accepted the wooden handle with careful hands, while Liam explained how to guide the kite against the changing wind. For nearly an hour the four of them remained together beneath the clear blue sky, laughing whenever the kite dipped too low and celebrating each time it climbed higher again. There was no discussion of lawyers, divorce papers, or painful memories. There was only shared laughter carried across an open field. As the afternoon came to an end, Benjamin knelt beside Liam and Layla before returning the kite. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I cannot remember the last time I smiled this much." Layla reached forward and wrapped her small arms around him without hesitation. Benjamin gently returned the embrace while Maya watched quietly from only a few steps away. Something inside her softened. She could see that the man standing before her was no longer chasing success at the expense of everything else. For the first time in many years, he seemed to understand that the moments which changed a life forever were often the smallest ones, shared with the people who mattered most. The weeks that followed changed Benjamin's life in ways no financial forecast could have predicted. For the first time since founding Crawford Global, he began arranging his schedule around people. Instead of meetings, Thursday afternoons were permanently reserved, not for investors or board members, but for Liam's soccer practice and Layla's weekly reading club at the neighborhood library. His executives quietly adjusted to the new routine, surprised to discover that the company continued thriving, even when its founder chose family over constant business travel. Benjamin had finally learned that success did not disappear simply because someone paused long enough to truly live. Maya noticed the change without hearing a single promise. Benjamin never arrived with extravagant presents or expensive surprises. Instead, he showed up carrying extra soccer balls when the neighborhood children needed them, repaired broken benches in the park with local volunteers, and stayed after community events to help stack folding chairs while everyone else headed home. One Saturday morning the neighborhood organized a cleanup project for the small park where Benjamin had first watched Maya and the twins together. Families planted flowers, painted fences, and collected litter while children proudly carried tiny watering cans from one flower bed to another. Benjamin worked beside everyone else wearing work gloves instead of a tailored suit. Several neighbors recognized him from business magazines but quickly realized he wanted no special attention. He simply wanted to help. During the afternoon, one of the local organizers approached Benjamin with exciting news. A large international investment group had offered Crawford Global an opportunity that would require Benjamin to relocate overseas for nearly a year, while supervising a major expansion. Every business advisor insisted the agreement would become the company's greatest achievement. The organizer congratulated him warmly, assuming he would leave within weeks. Benjamin thanked him politely but said nothing. That evening he sat alone in his office overlooking the Manhattan skyline while the unsigned agreement rested on his desk. Only months earlier he would have accepted without hesitation. Now every page reminded him of another decision made years before when work had quietly replaced the people waiting for him at home. A sunset reflected across the city. Benjamin folded the contract, placed it back inside its envelope, and called the chairman of his board. "I appreciate the opportunity," he said calmly, "but I will not be leading the overseas expansion." Silence filled the line before the chairman finally asked why. Benjamin smiled gently while looking toward a framed drawing Liam and Layla had recently given him. It showed 4 people flying a kite together beneath bright autumn leaves. Because there are some investments that cannot survive another year of waiting. The following morning he returned to the park carrying breakfast for the volunteers preparing another community project. Maya noticed the unusual peace in his expression almost immediately. "You made a difficult decision," she said softly. Benjamin nodded. "The easiest decision of my life once I understood what truly mattered." She studied him quietly before asking no further questions. She already knew the answer. Later that afternoon Liam proudly rode his bicycle without training wheels for the first time while Layla clapped enthusiastically from the sidewalk. Benjamin jogged beside the bicycle for several yards before letting go, watching the boy continue confidently on his own. Liam turned around with a joyful smile and shouted, "Did you see that?" Benjamin laughed with genuine happiness. "I saw everything." Maya stood beneath the maple trees with quiet gratitude shining in her eyes. She realized the man beside her was no longer trying to recover the years they had lost. He was honoring them by never wasting another day that still belonged to the future. Nearly a year had passed since the afternoon Benjamin first saw Maya standing at the grocery store counting coins with Liam and Layla. Autumn returned once again, but the quiet sadness that had once surrounded their lives had slowly been replaced by something far more enduring. The neighborhood community center had become the heart of the small district, filled every afternoon with children reading books, volunteers helping with homework, and families sharing simple meals after long workdays. Benjamin never allowed his name to appear on the entrance or on any of the new classrooms his company had quietly funded. Instead, every room carried the names of local teachers, longtime volunteers, and neighbors who had served the community long before he arrived. Maya understood why. Benjamin no longer wanted recognition. He wanted purpose. One Saturday morning the community gathered to celebrate the opening of a new learning garden beside the center. Parents planted flowers while children painted colorful wooden signs with encouraging messages about kindness, hope, and curiosity. Liam proudly showed younger children how to care for the small vegetable beds, patiently explaining how every seed needed both sunshine and time before it could grow. Layla sat beneath a maple tree reading stories aloud to several preschool children, who listened with wide eyes and joyful laughter. Benjamin spent the morning assembling benches beside local carpenters, his hands covered with sawdust instead of ink from business contracts. Nobody treated him like a celebrity. They greeted him by his first name, handed him tools, and thanked him for helping exactly as they thanked every other volunteer. Maya watched him from across the garden with quiet admiration. She remembered the ambitious young man she had married years ago, driven by dreams that slowly became larger than the life they were building together. The man standing beneath the autumn trees looked completely different. Success had not disappeared from his life. It had simply found a better place inside it. As the afternoon drew to a close, Mrs. Alvarez invited the children to write letters describing what home meant to them. Liam wrote carefully for several minutes before folding his paper. Layla decorated hers with bright leaves and tiny hearts drawn in colored pencil. One by one the children placed their letters inside a wooden memory box that would remain inside the library for future generations to read. Before closing the lid, Mrs. Alvarez asked if anyone wished to share their letter aloud. Liam raised his hand. His voice remained calm as he unfolded the page. Home is the place where people keep showing up, even after making mistakes. Home is where forgiveness becomes stronger than sadness. Home is where somebody waits for you because they love you. Silence filled the garden. Benjamin lowered his eyes, unable to hide the emotion rising inside him. Maya quietly reached for his hand without saying a word. Her fingers rested gently within his, not because every painful memory had disappeared, but because trust had returned one ordinary day after another. When the gathering ended and families slowly walked home beneath the golden evening sky, Benjamin and Maya remained standing beside the young maple tree planted near the entrance. Leaves drifted softly around them while children laughed in the distance. Benjamin looked toward Maya with complete sincerity. "Thank you," he whispered. "Not only for giving me another chance, but for protecting kindness inside our children, even when I was not there to help." Maya smiled through grateful tears before placing a gentle kiss upon his cheek. "People become who they choose to be every day," she answered softly. "You finally chose the life that mattered most." Together they watched Liam and Layla race across the garden with carefree laughter, and for the first time since their lives had fallen apart years earlier, the future no longer felt like something they hoped to find. It had quietly begun to grow all around them. Exactly 1 year after the afternoon that had quietly changed every path their lives would follow, Benjamin parked his car outside the same neighborhood grocery store where he had first seen Maya counting coins with Liam and Layla. The city looked almost unchanged. Autumn leaves still drifted across the sidewalk. The familiar cashier still greeted customers with the same warm smile. The old brick building still reflected the soft golden light of late afternoon. Yet everything that truly mattered had been transformed. Maya stepped out of the car beside him, her hand naturally finding his as though trust had grown one quiet day at a time until it no longer questioned where it belonged. Liam and Layla hurried ahead carrying a small glass jar filled with carefully saved coins. Benjamin smiled as he watched them race toward the entrance with the same excitement children usually reserved for birthdays or holidays. Inside the store, the twins walked directly to a wooden community donation box that had been placed near the register several months earlier to help families facing temporary hardship. Liam unscrewed the lid of the jar while Layla carefully poured every penny, nickel, dime, and quarter inside. The soft sound of the coins falling together echoed gently through the quiet store. The cashier recognized the family immediately and smiled with moist eyes. "You do not have to give all of it," she said kindly. Liam looked up with complete certainty. Someone else might be 37 cents short today. Benjamin felt his throat tighten as those simple words carried him back to the moment that had begun everything. Maya gently rested her hand on Liam's shoulder, while Layla reached for Benjamin's hand without hesitation. He looked down at the little girl and quietly squeezed her fingers, silently grateful for a gift he once believed he no longer deserved. After leaving the grocery store, the family walked together toward the neighborhood park where the maple trees had once witnessed Benjamin watching them from a distance, too afraid to speak. This time there were no hidden questions, no painful silence, and no years standing between them. Children laughed across the playground while neighbors greeted them warmly by name. The park had become another home filled with familiar faces and shared memories. Benjamin spread a picnic blanket beneath the same old oak tree where he had once stood alone, overwhelmed by regret. Now Liam eagerly unpacked homemade sandwiches while Layla proudly arranged fresh apples and warm muffins Maya had baked that morning. They ate together beneath the golden leaves, talking about school projects, soccer games, library events, and the community garden that continued growing stronger with every season. Nothing about the afternoon appeared extraordinary to anyone passing by. Yet Benjamin understood that these ordinary moments were the greatest treasures he had ever known. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the Manhattan skyline, Maya turned toward him with a peaceful smile that held no trace of the distance that had once separated them. Benjamin gently brushed a loose curl away from her face and looked into her eyes with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, "for never allowing bitterness to teach our children what love should look like." Maya answered by placing a gentle kiss upon his lips, warm, tender, and filled with every unspoken promise that had been rebuilt through patience rather than perfection. Liam laughed as he and Layla chased bright autumn leaves across the grass, their joyful voices carried softly by the evening breeze. Benjamin watched them with grateful eyes before looking once more toward the grocery store visible beyond the trees. A year earlier he believed he had found his former wife counting coins. In truth, he had found the family he thought he had lost forever and discovered that the richest life was never measured by millions of dollars, but by the people who chose to walk beside you every ordinary day until those ordinary days quietly became everything.